Let's talk about Dawn, a hidden role game where you can change your role at any time. Welcome to Brains on Games. I'm Dr. Brian McDonald. In this episode, we're going to talk about a semi-cooperative game that was sent to me recently by the folks over at Green Meadow Games. It is a game called Dawn. Now, Dawn is a game for between 2 and 5 players. Kids age 14 and up can get into this one, and games take about 45 minutes to play. Let's take a deeper look at Dawn by Green Meadow Games. Dawn is a light, semi-cooperative game where players are taking on hidden roles. They're either going to be allies or scoundrels. The allies are working together to build buildings, and they will win the game if they earn 30 points per allied player at the end, once you find out how many allies there are. Scoundrels will win the game if they have the most treasure hidden in their storehouse. And you decide on your role by storing treasure in your storehouse underneath this card right here. If you've got 7 or more treasures under here, you've declared yourself a scoundrel who's selfishly trying to earn as much coin as possible. But otherwise, you're going to be one of the allies who are trying to earn victory points by building those buildings. Your board's going to look something like this at the beginning of the game. On one side, you're going to see some great buildings. These stay throughout the game, and you're going to be continually playing cards face down underneath these buildings in order to either earn the victory points if you're an ally, or cancel out the cards under here so that the allies can't win if you're playing as a scoundrel. You'll also have a number of buildings and threats that are dealt out at the beginning of each round. Now, in this case, you've got 3 buildings. There are 2 threats here. On the back of these cards, the buildings are going to show you the number of victory points if you build them. If you don't manage to build them, they're just going to get discarded. The threats might create some problem for the players. Some of them cause buildings that you've built to be destroyed. Others will cause all of the players to get a wound. But you don't know, of course, at the beginning of the round, unless you play cards that allow you to peek at the back of the buildings, how much they're worth, or to peek at the back of the threats to determine, oh, should we spend some cards to defeat this? This one, for example, these barbarians, well, if you do nothing, nothing's going to happen. So that's not a card that you necessarily want to waste cards on in order to defeat it. Whereas if you've got a card like this one and you choose to ignore it, all players are going to get a wound. You're going to play the game over 6 rounds, and the number of buildings and threat cards are going to allow, it's going to allow you to track that very easily. As soon as you run out of cards, you're entering that 6th round, and the final round is the one where you can only play cards to the great buildings that have been here on the side since the beginning of the game. Each player is going to have 9 cards at the start of their turn. At the beginning of the game, 2 of those cards are these wound cards, and these can pile up, in response to threats. You might take more wounds, and they're just taking up space in your hand, preventing you from getting more useful cards. The rounds will proceed in this way. So if I'm the first player, if I'm the active player, I'm going to begin by taking a card from my hand and putting it into my storehouse. Remember, if you want to be a scoundrel, you've got to have the most treasures, and you have to have 7 or more. So I might take this 3 treasure card and place this under my storehouse here like this. Now the other cards, I can just discard them to take other actions. I might place cards face down in order to defeat a threat. So in this case, I have this little spy icon. I can put this right here in order to defeat that threat. I might put some cards with treasures on them to build a building. So here we go with that. I need 10 treasures in order to build this one. But what have I placed here? -2 treasures. So you can really mess with the other players depending on where you play your cards. You can discard cards to take actions as well. So for example, I've got 2 wild cards and a healing card here. If I discard 3 healing cards, I can take a wound from my hand and put it back into the general supply. That's going to allow me to take a card that's more useful when I replenish my hand at the end of the round. If I discard a spy card like this one, it will allow me to peek at the back of a threat or a building to see if it's worth playing cards to defeat it or to build it. So in this case here we have a plague. Nothing's going to happen if I do nothing about this plague, so I don't need to play any cards to that area of the board. And the attack cards are interesting too. So if I discard one of those red attack cards, I can take two of the cards from underneath one of these buildings or threats on the board, look at both of them, and choose to discard one if I want to. So if I'm a scoundrel, I might be getting rid of the icons that are going to allow you to build this building, or get rid of the icons that are going to allow you to defeat a threat. Whereas if I'm an ally, I might be trying to cancel out those extra cards that are going to mess with the allies' plans. Those attack cards also give you an idea of what cards are being played, and maybe if you can remember who played them, you'll be able to figure out, is that person acting as a scoundrel or is he really an ally? Now, of course, you can look at those cards, you can peek at the bottom of those cards by discarding a spy card, but you don't have to tell anyone else what's on there or tell the truth about what's on those cards. So you could lie and say, "Oh, this is a card that's going to result in a wound for everyone if we don't deal with this threat." And then the other players might find out at the end that that wasn't true, and they just wasted their cards playing them to this area of the board. So you'll play a card to your storehouse, and then you'll start playing cards to various buildings and threats on the table. Once you decide, okay, well, I'm going to keep these cards for a later turn, or I'm all done all the actions that I want to take, then you can pass, and the next player will get to do the same thing. There is one other action that you can take in this game, and that is you can swap as many cards as you want from your storehouse to your hand. So on the fifth turn, I might decide, I've been trying to be an ally all along, but it looks like the allies can't win. I might want to be a scoundrel instead. You can change your role. You can change your mind about these cards. If you've got a hand where you want to be a scoundrel, but you have a hand where you didn't have any cards with 3 treasures on them, you might want to take one of those weaker cards out and put a stronger one in. So you can change your role. It does make things quite dynamic when you're playing the game, because you might be doing the math and decide, well, wait, my plan from the beginning is not the plan that's going to be the best way to win. Now, what skills are you working on when you play Dawn? Well, there is some math here. You're calculating out how many cards do you need, and where are you going to put them on the board. You're also calculating out those points, 30 points per allied player. And you have to figure out, well, how many allies are there? If you want to be a scoundrel, that is also interesting as well, because if I'm a scoundrel, that means the allies need fewer points in order to win. And if there are too many scoundrels, you might find that, it doesn't matter how many treasures I had stored, the allies were able to get those 30 points. If there's only one ally, well, that's it. The allies win the game. You're also doing some deduction. You do want to remember the cards that you've seen, the cards that have been played, and hopefully who played them. And you're using those deductive reasoning skills in order to figure out, is this person playing as an ally who I can trust if I'm another ally? Is this person a scoundrel who, any card that they play, I'm going to be questioning, is that going to interfere with the plans that I have? So there's some math involved and some memory, and then you're also doing that social deduction of trying to figure out who's who. And those roles can change. They might change their mind halfway through the game. Final thoughts about Dawn. Well, this is a hidden role game, but what I think is interesting or unique about it is that you choose which role you want to take, and you can change your mind as you play through the game, depending on how things are playing out on the table. There's a lot of table talk here. So there haven't been too many games recently that I've played where people are working together and sort of coming up with a plan together and cooperating. So you do have that table talk, and that is really important. But you have to decide, who can you trust? If a player says, well, I'm going to deal with this threat, or this is a building that's worth a lot of points, we should play our cards to that building, can you believe them based on what you think their role is in the game? This was, I think, the first semi-cooperative game that the other folks in my playgroup have played. We had a younger person in the group too, and on the first game, he was obviously a scoundrel, and he managed to have the most cards and won the game in that way. But on the second game, everybody was a little bit more circumspect in the way that they played their cards. So they were trying to keep those roles a bit more hidden. It is a game where that table talk is really important. Now, are there downsides to Dawn? Well, I will say in my copy of the game, and it's possible your mileage might vary on this one, but I'm not sure if you'll be able to tell, the backs of the cards were not all the same shade of brown. So there were some lighter and some darker cards in the deck. There was one card in the stack that had this white dot on it. So it makes it a bit harder to be secretive if you can sort of tell which cards each player has played because of the shades on the back of them. Now, that was my copy of the game. Your mileage might vary on that one. It is one where I think, keep in mind that the crew I was playing with were new to semi-cooperative games, but it is a game where it seemed like it was the allies had to work to earn those points, but a scoundrel could almost sit back and do nothing, and that's going to make it very hard for the allies to win. So it seemed like the balance was in favor of the scoundrels, but if everyone's playing as scoundrels, well, I mean, it is interesting that means the allies need fewer points, but if there are multiple scoundrels, it's sort of random. You know, depending on what you've got in your hand, you're going to have 1 to 3 treasures that you can dump into your storehouse. And we found in one game there were 3 players. 2 of us were scoundrels. The allies could not get anywhere in that game, and the one scoundrel won by 1 treasure over the other, and it was just because, well, I put the most treasures underneath my storehouse that I had on every single round, but I just didn't get enough 3 treasures. Some of mine were negative. So it's a game where it does seem to be balanced in favor of the scoundrels, but the scoundrels' number of points is going to be fairly random depending on which cards they get. That being said, the folks that I played this game with thought that the mechanism of choosing your role and keeping your role a secret found those things to be a lot of fun and wanted to keep playing a few more times. Each time we played, it was like, oh, let's try another round of this. I want to see if I can figure this out. So this was a game that the group enjoyed. So I've got to thank Green Meadow Games for sending this game my way. If you have any questions about Dawn or any questions or suggestions about anything else having to do with Brains on Games, you can leave them in the comments section below the video, or you can email me at brian@brainsongames.ca. Brainsongames.ca is the website. That's where future episodes will go, and the previous ones are up there already. Brains on Games is the Twitter handle and the Facebook page and the Instagram feed, so we're all over the place. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to be notified of future ones, you can head on over to YouTube and click that subscribe button. Thanks for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you next time.